Um, all right. So everyone, welcome to another session of Next Talks, right? NESTCON Talks. Right? Today we are going to be having George. Um, I like to call him All Father. Yeah. George is someone I've known for quite some time. And so he's going to be showing us some very interesting and wonderful stuff. Right. So yeah, George, yeah, you can take it away.
Okay. Okay, yeah, there's an introduction, or I introduce myself later on in the presentation, but as just a quick one, as Maxam said, my name is George, and today I have been invited to take you through my experience with initial access techniques. So, what I've seen in the industry right now and what works for me on pen test. So, that's just a bit of knowledge I have come to share with you guys today. Okay, so we'll begin with this the presentation, a bit of myself. Please, can you confirm you can see my screen? If everyone can confirm they can see. Max Sam, can
Yeah,
you see my
George,
screen?
yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, sure. All right. So a bit about myself. My name is Kuoribo George. I am a cybersecurity consultant. Just the boilerplate. I have done penetration tests for over 4 years now. I've done it for banks. I've done it for fintechs. I've done it for government institutions, technology institutions, to the left, you can see my certifications and qualifications. So this is just a bit about me. So the presentation I'm told is supposed to be really short. So I'll just go through the presentation as fast as I can. Usually the beauty or the interesting part comes in the question and answer session. That's where you get to learn a lot. Then you also get to get interesting perspectives from people. All right, so today we are dealing with initial access techniques. So I have the initial access techniques is going to be focused on internal penetration tests. So mainly Active Directory environments. How I've been able to get initial footholds into Active Directory environments. So the techniques, I'm going to discuss five main techniques. The first one being credential-based attacks. The second one being ADCS relay attacks. The third one being token-based phishing. So token-based phishing is something my team and I came across that worked very effectively for us in a recent engagement. Right now, because of the way the landscape is and the requirements by the ISO 27001 for organizations to perform awareness on cybersecurity, phishing simulations are becoming more sophisticated. So this is just a tweak in the phishing technique that yields more outcome, that yields a better outcome for we penetration testers. Yeah. So my fourth is going to be Wi-Fi, basically Wi-Fi hacking. So WPA management tool, how to use that to gain initial foothold into the system. And last but not least, sorry, ASAP roasting. So that's just basically what we're going to cover in the course of this presentation. All right. So let's start with credential-based attacks. So credential-based attacks. Now we have a couple of I don't know how many pen testers are here. There is a report that's normally released every year on the number of breaches that have occurred, stuff like that. The Verizon, they call it the Verizon report, the Verizon cybersecurity report that tackles how threat actors have been getting initial footholds into systems. So now with that particular report, one thing that was really highlighted in that particular report was the fact that nowadays attackers always go to particular sites that have credentials from breach databases, credential leaks, stuff like that. They have it and they sell it. They sell it to pen testers, and pen testers buy these credentials and they test it to see if it works. So for foothold, one thing I have experienced in my journey as a pen tester is in a couple of instances we bought these leaked credentials. Normally, when we are buying credentials like that, we have different places we get it from. We can get it from Flare, we can get it from Dhash, We can get it from have I been pwned? Then when we get it, we try to authenticate into, remember, this is focusing mainly on internal Active Directory. So we try to authenticate it to the domain controller. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. If it works, then you see you've just crossed one hurdle because the concept of getting initial foothold, if you do this for a while, you realize that getting actual initial foothold is not that easy. So that's something we have been seeing in the industry. Another one is password spraying. I cannot count the number of times password spraying has helped me. So usually when I go into an organization to perform a penetration test, what I pay attention to is any form of default credentials that are being used. When I say default credentials, what I mean by that is usually some organizations, when you go to them, they provide you with a base credential. Then after they provide you with that base credential, when you use it, you are required to change that particular credential. So one thing I normally do is I pay a lot of attention to that particular credential. Then when I get that particular credential, I spray it across the, what do you call it? The usernames I have, then see whether one of them will authenticate to the domain. This works 7 out of 10 times. Is that effective? Is very effective as an initial access vector. Is very, very effective. Now, I'm sure there will be a follow-up question as to how I get the list of usernames. When usually I get on a network, I try as much as possible to reduce noise on the network. So I know a lot of you have heard of the IP version 6 attack, which you do with man in the middle 6, and you do with man in the middle 6. That particular NTLM relay, where you relay credentials, with that particular attack, you can use it to dump domain information. Now, what this gives you, that particular attack requires no credentials of any kind. This gives you an insight into the organization's configurations. One, a list of the usernames, a list of the computers, the operating systems the computers use. So another version of this is even from that list, within the list of computers, you can see outdated operating systems being run, which you can leverage on to also get initial access. You get it? But that particular method hasn't worked for me in a while because right now patch management is very effective in environments, especially enterprise environments. Patch management is very effective. So these are two methods to which I get initial foothold into environments. So now let's go to the second one. The second one is the ADCS relay. So we've spoken about man in the middle 6. We all know, I'm assuming most of us here are pen testers. If you are not pen testers, one thing we need to know about Active Directory environments is that the way they are set up to prefer IP version 6 over IP version 4. So that particular man in the middle 6 attack is very, very good. So one thing I normally do when I get into environments is that I try to relay the credentials I get with activity from the man in the middle 6 to my what do you call it? My ADCS. That's if there's an ADCS running. ADCS stands for Active Directory Certificate Services. This is an alternative method for authentication used by the Active Directory. So I try as much as possible to relay the credentials that I capture from activity to ADCS and see if I can get a valid certificate. So now, most often than not, what I normally do is, so I gain initial access to the network. Now, this is just a caveat I want to give out, not actually mainly part of the presentation, but something I just thought I'll mention. Getting network access to an environment in itself is a complex endeavor because usually most organizations, enterprise level organizations, they implement network access controls. What normally they do is that they make sure that any person that wants to get access to the network via Ethernet has to authenticate into that particular network. So it can be a username and a password, or it can be, what do you call it? What they do is they whitelist all the MAC addresses for that particular computer. So that's also something we try to bypass when we are doing engagements like this, but that's just by the way. So once I gain that foothold into that access to the network, the thing is that I trigger my man in the middle 6 and I trigger my NTLM relay X, the activity, I capture one of the activities, the NTLM sessions of a user, then I relay it to the ADCS and it gives me a valid certificate. With this valid certificate, what I can do with it is that I can use it to generate a Kerberos ticket, granting ticket, or just extract or just get an, what do you call it, an NTLM hash. Once I get an NTLM hash, I can just pass the hash and continue moving through the environment. So you see, this is pretty straightforward. No credential. Then from no credential, you move to normal user credential. Now, if you have been studying trends in Active Directory exploitation, something that is very difficult to it's very difficult for organizations to protect against is the cohesion attacks. So basically what you just do is once and with cohesion attacks, at first you could coerce a particular computer to no, I think let me break this down a bit. So cohesion attacks, as the name suggests, means that you are coercing something to do something. So at first, what used to happen when this particular vulnerability was unpatched was that people could coerce machine to authenticate to NTLM relay. So they coerce the machine accounts to authenticate to NTLM relay, and with that, they can be able to generate a certificate for that particular machine account. So this particular vulnerability was patched, but they didn't patch it all the way. So now you cannot do it unauthenticated. You need to be authenticated to be able to perform this particular attack. So what we normally do is first, when we get basic low-level credentials for the environment, then we just coerce maybe let's say the domain controller's machine account to authenticate, then we relay, then we get the certificate of the domain controller account. Once we get that particular one, we just use it to secret dump all the NTLM hashes on that particular environment. And since it's the domain controller, you can imagine it to have all the NTLM hashes of all the users. Then you just proceed to pass the hash. You just start accessing stuff. So that is also one of the techniques that has been very, very useful and very, very effective and efficient for us in our engagements. Let's go to the third one. Let's go to the third one. That's token attack. So this one actually came about with we were supposed to perform an engagement, and it involved the scope. One of the scope areas was social engineering phishing, but we realized that the phishing engagements that were done previously for the organization were not very effective because they went with a generic username, password, input username, password. So fix sites, make the domain look a bit like their domain, then username, password. So the team decided to do a bit of research to see what new novel techniques are out there. And one of the techniques we found was the device code. So there are two techniques. So I'll tackle the device code first, the device code phishing. So what this technique does is it abuses the OAuth 2.0 authentication. So what that authentication does is, so for instance, I think it's very prevalent with smart TVs. So with smart TVs, let's say you want to log in into the smart TV, but you know the way the TV is designed to have limited input. So what the TV does is that it uses the device code flow. So it gives you a particular device code, then it gives you a URL, a Microsoft URL. You go to the URL, you input the code it gives you, then Microsoft per that particular authentication will give the device an access token and a refresh token to access the resources it needs. So usually the authorities that manage this are either Microsoft. I think Microsoft does it, Google does it, GitHub too does it. So these are some of the authorities that manage it. So the permissions that are being granted between the two parties are done by Microsoft, Google, and GitHub. So with these tokens, you can actually do a lot. So once you get the refresh and the access token, now this is how this works. The access token is valid for an hour, I think, and the refresh token is valid for I think 90 days. So even if the person changes the password, you can continue to refresh, get a new access token, then you continue your attack. This is it's a very interesting attack because people, the way you fall victim to this is just by clicking. accepting and granting access of my malicious device to have access to your account. Then your account gives me the Microsoft server gives me your access token and your refresh token. And with that, it's Microsoft. Microsoft, you see the email, you see the Teams, all of that are just UIs that are hitting particular endpoints. So with the access token and the refresh token, you can hit those particular endpoints. So that particular person you've compromised, you can access the Teams chat, you can access the mail, the email, you can access the calendar, you can access the SharePoint, you can access the OneDrive. And within those particular files, you can now search for passwords, you can search for stuff like that to enable you to move laterally into the environment. So that's device code phishing for you. Then we have illicit consent granting. For illicit consent granting, instead of you granting access to what do you call it? A device, you are granting access to an application. So I create a malicious application, then I send the malicious application to you. Once you click and you grant me access, grant that application access, then the application receives the authorized token, the refresh token, then I just use it. So we use this usually when we are doing it. I think I have a portion that has what do you call it? A place you can go for more research to look into stuff like this. Black Hills really has good material on this, how to each token. So each depending on what you want to do with the tokens, whether you want to access mail, Teams, SharePoint, whatsoever, there is a tool that's developed by Black Hills that allows you to refresh the token. It's called Token Tactics each time to access those particular stuff you want to access. So this is a novel technique I just thought I would share for people who are in the industry to also make use of it. So we move on to the next initial access technique. That's WPA management. This was a very interesting one. So usually we have WPA, so Wi-Fi. There are different protocols. We have the WPA PSK, that's the pre-shared key. What that is what we normally use in our everyday. So let's see the hotspots we use, the normal router configuration where we are just required to use one password to access the network. That particular password is shared, so it's called pre-shared key. Everybody uses that particular password to access the network. But I think there were issues with, think from a security perspective, if I leave the organization and I don't leave the organization on a good note, then later on I come back to the organization, I come and I want to cause harm to that particular organization. I already have the password to access the network, so I just access it and do whatever malicious thing I want. So the people thought it wise to implement a sort of a sort of variation of this particular protocol that the person needs a username and a password or a certificate to authenticate to it. So what in this particular initial access vector, what happened was, and what happens for some enterprises is the WPA management is usually connected to a radio server, and a radio server is connected to the AD. So you can use your AD credentials to log into the Wi-Fi. You get it? So there is an attack within WPA2 management where you can just create a rogue access point. I'm saying it and it seems simple, but implementation is a bit more difficult. But you create a rogue access point with the same name as the organization's Wi-Fi, then people are forced, then you de-authenticate people. People are forced to authenticate you. And while they are authenticating to you, they give you their username, then they give you their net NTLM v2 hash, then with that, those hashes and those usernames are domain joined. So once you are able to crack those, you will be able to authenticate into the domain. So that's one of the ways we've been using to get initial foothold into environments. So we moved on to the last but not least, ASAP roasting. So we know K roasting, we know ASAP roasting. Cape roasting, ASAP roasting is just Cape roasting, but you don't need credentials to be able to request the hashes, the Cape roast hashes. So usually when you perform, if you don't want to make noise in the environment, when you perform the initial IP version 6 attack I spoke of, what you can do is that you can go through the usernames. Within the usernames, there are attributes that are assigned to them. The attributes for Kbrosts, for ASAP roasting is that they don't require pre-authentication set. That particular attribute is not set. So once that particular attribute is set, sorry, that particular attribute is set. So once that particular attribute is set, even from that particular information, you can know the users you can request for their, what do you call it, their Kerberos hashes without actually interacting with the system. You can also interact with the system using NetExec or in packet to be able to get that. But usually I try as much as possible not to interact with the system so as to not trigger EDLs, the SOC, the monitoring, stuff like that. Because once the SOC know you are at this particular place, to make sure they put in place all the measures to block you from accessing what you want to access. So this is one way we also use to get initial access. So you get the initial access, you get the, what do you call it, the hashes. Then after you get the hashes, you take them offline and you try to crack them. Once you crack them, then you'll be able to authenticate into the network and continue if it's lateral movement, if it's privilege escalation, whatever you want to do, you continue with that. Then last but not least, just measures to put in place to prevent these particular attacks. So for the, what you call a credential-based attack, just implement MFA, then put in place, what do you call it, breach monitoring. That's your threat intelligence should be very good so that you monitor stuff like that. With the ADCS relay, you disable NTLM for authentication. Usually environments, you don't know the dependencies that are there. NTLM works a lot. So for authentication, you can disable NTLM with device code with token phishing. That one is just, you make sure you disable your conditional access policies. So that one is just within the cloud environment. Some of these vulnerabilities are just present because of a toggle. You just go no off and you save yourself. You just take out the whole attack surface. That's how this particular one work. And WPA rogue access point, you put in place certificate pinning and the likes to be, or strong password policies to prevent people from accessing stuff like that. For ASAP hosting, you enable pre-authentication on the users and you also put in place a strong password policy, because if I am able to capture these hashes and I'm not able to crack them, you see that, then that's just a waste of time. So this just brings me to the end of my presentation. As I mentioned, here are a few resources you can access or you can go to read more about the topics I have spoken of. So thank you. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I welcome questions.
All right. Thanks, George, for this interesting presentation. I personally, I have a few questions. Right. So, you talked about a number of initial access techniques, right? Which one would you go for? Like, which one would you try first? Like, depending on the kind of environment that you're in.
So password screen, because the one that is quick, very quick is ADCS. But it's not all organizations that have ADCS enabled. You get it? So it becomes some way. But for quick, I first of all try to dump domain information. Then from domain information, I password spray. If the password spray with the knowledge I have, if it doesn't work, then I now try to be creative. If it's that I am going to do whatever I'm going to do, I do it. But that's just usually that's my go-to. That's my go-to for initial access. Password spray. I get my name of my list of usernames, and even there are instances. That's why usually when I'm speaking to pen testers, I always advise them try and dump domain information first, because in the descriptions for all the users, when you dump the domain information, there might be a password that is there. If you get me, there might be a password that is there. So if you pay attention to that and you find a password that is there, then it's good for you. And my experience with these organizations or organizations over the time I have performed penetration tests, the hurdle is always initial access. Once you get initial access, domain admin is not really that difficult. It's maybe when you want to access resources like core banking or you want to go into the Swift environment, that's when it becomes a whole different ballgame altogether. But moving from no low-level user to domain admin usually is not that difficult once you get initial access. I don't know if that answers your question, Maxwell.
Yeah. All right. So that's wonderful. Thanks for answering the questions. I can see we have some people that have questions. We have some questions in. We have some hands raised. So first, we'll take Wendell's question and then we'll move on to Isaac Matthew's question as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I really love your presentation. More of the token-based phishing like this is something new that I've not heard about, and it's something I'll read about. But my question is that when it comes to the defensive side, okay, you
Yeah.
mentioned AS Rep roasted, okay, the use of Rubio's Bloodhound and all those tools, okay, because Kerberos doesn't what's it called, trigger failed logins and event IDs of logging in attempts. Okay, my question is that how would you um not be able to, like, how, which defense evasion mechanism will you use to kind of avoid triggering some rules? Because in a matured environment, even though failed logins are not triggered, okay, the use of these tools, we know that Rubios is used, Sharphound is used, process creation events for those activities are always logged. Okay, so if you are using these tools, immediately you use them, we will be able to know that something is going on from this IP. So is there any other tool that you can use to perform this same type of attack? Because the Rubios, Bloodhound, all of them create process executable logs that can be like triggered. Okay.
Okay. So this is a very good question, but I think I spoke to it earlier at the beginning of my presentation. So let's take, for instance, as you mentioned, the ASAP roasting. So ASAP roasting, you can check ASAP roasting, as you mentioned, with Rubius. You can also check with NetExec, but that might cause noise. That's true. But now, if you have dumped domain information before, and you look through the information you get for the user's part, the domain user's part, you see that you have a list of attributes not delegated, you have a password not required to change, you have different attributes. One of the attributes there is don't pre-auth. And any user that has that attribute set ultimately has, what do you call it, is ultimately vulnerable to ASAP posting. So there is no need to use tools like Rubios or NetExec to confirm that when you've already gotten it from your initial activity. So with that one, you just use that particular information to get those list of users, then you can proceed with whatever you want to do. I don't know if that answers your question, Wendell.
Yes, that answers it. Thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome.
Hi, hello.
Yeah, you can ask your question.
No, okay. Yeah, so my question is about the relays. Have you ever been in an environment that's SMB relays attacks the work?
SMB, SMB don't work. So SMB usually doesn't work because of I will personally, I'll blame the cyber mentor for SMB release not working. But that's just, by the way, that's just a light one. So SMB relays became very prevalent at some point. So most what do you call enterprises, so usually when enterprises want to manage patch or configurations on a large scale in AD, they use the SCCM. I think now it's called the MECM. So they just push the configurations across. So SMB relays don't work, but because they've enabled the SMB signing on both, what do you call it, both servers and workstations. Ideally, under normal circumstances, by default, SMB, what do you call it, signing, I think is enabled for the domain controller by default, but workstations is not enabled. But they fixed that. But one thing I don't see enterprises putting in place is LDAP signing. They don't usually enable that. And that is how you can leverage on LDAP signing, the lack of LDAP signing to also relay this particular credential, to relay this particular NTLM hashes to perform your attack.
And one question about the coercion.
Yeah,
I see there's one coercion that happens in MSQL. Have you ever come across that one in your field?
MSQL.
Yeah, there was one in one of the MSQLs. The way the ADCS coercion works, the NTLM relay coercion works.
Yeah.
It works that way. You input a certain code, then it seems you get a service account hash that is in charge of the MSQL.
That
Have
is
you?
so what can happen is so I what I know about cohesion attacks is so it depends if service accounts, that's interesting. I haven't come across that. I haven't come. Usually, what I normally do for pen tests of what I've seen or what I've come across is belaying machine accounts, but I haven't done it for service accounts before. But that's interesting. That's interesting. I think I'll look into that. I'll look into that. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Isaac.
All right. I have a question of my own, right? But we're running out of time and we really have to wrap up now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there are no other questions, so George, I'll see you in with private chambers with my questions.
George,
Right.
please, can you reshare the slides? Like, can you go back to the slide where the
Okay.
articles are?
The slide where the
The articles there, yeah. Okay.
oh okay, these okay, sure,
Thank you.
sure.
All right. So if there are no other questions, then we can call it a day. Thank you everyone for joining this session, and I hope you look forward to the next session. We have exciting things coming up. So yeah, we can call it a night.
All right, sure. Thank you very much. All right.